Major funding for Frontline is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide.
Tonight, this man, an Arab, this man, an Israeli, take their search for peace to America.
You can shout and make me unable to speak, but this solves no problem.
I'm not going to change the world, but I can speak. And I can speak with a Palestinian friend and show that the dialogue is possible.
Can two enemies learn to trust each other? Tonight on Frontline, the story of the Arab and the Israeli.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline with Judy Woodruff.
Good evening. What does it take for two enemies to overcome their fears, bitterness, and distrust to make peace? That's the theme of our story tonight. Two men recently came to the United States on a speaking tour, one an Israeli, the other a Palestinian Arab. Their people have fought each other in 4 wars, but they came here, co-sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee and a group called New Jewish Agenda, to begin what they called a dialogue for peace, to understand each other and their dilemma. Can Arabs and Israelis ever live in peace? When the United Nations voted to create a Jewish homeland in 1947, the UN said this area, which was known as Palestine, should be partitioned into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. The Arab part included the West Bank of the Jordan River. But the West Bank was annexed by Jordan, and then in 1967, seized by Israel in the 6-Day War. Ever since, close to 1 million Palestinian Arabs there have been under Israeli military occupation. This small piece of earth, the West Bank, half the size of Connecticut, is a key to peace in the Middle East. Will it be given back to Jordan? Will it be part of Israel? Or could it become a separate Palestinian state next to Israel? Tonight, the story of a Palestinian from the West Bank and an Israeli journeying from city to city in America, speaking before Jewish and Arab American audiences, attempting to trust and understand each other. Our program, produced by Steve York, is called The Arab and the Israeli.
Peace lives here and here. Peace is not borders. The secure borders should be in the heads of the Israelis. It's never too late for us.
Mohammed Milhem, Palestinian. Elected mayor of his hometown in the West Bank, he was expelled by Israeli military authorities.
You have to remember that from the Israeli perspective, they are very suspicious of the Palestinians generally, and certainly of the PLO. Therefore, it's important...
Mordecai Baron, Israeli. Career Army officer in the Israeli Defense Forces, once a senior aide to General Moshe Dayan. He is an historian by profession and a leader in the Peace Now movement in Israel. Baron the Israeli and Milhem the Palestinian. They came to the United States in the spring of 1984 to talk with Americans and to talk to each other.
Both sides have a growing understanding to one fact, that the era of violence in the Middle East must be over. That no side can gain anything out of using force.
But in a few cities, the very idea of talking to each other sparked protest.
We are doing something which is almost impossible. We belong to 2 camps that have been in a bitter strife for the last 60 years. Mr. Milhem is 54 years, I'm his senior, I'm 55. And almost like prisoners, we are bound to listen to each other. We are bound to sometimes be shocked by what the other says. We are bound to be revolted by what the other says. And yet we are chained to each other by one important chain. And this is our deep conviction and feeling that we have to make our dent, our contribution to end this strife, to transcend it, to get out of it.
Seattle. At the University of Washington, almost half the audience was Arab American. And Mohammed Milham knew he would be criticized for appearing with an Israeli.
Mordechai served in the Israeli armed forces ever since he was 17. And he fought against the Palestinians and the Arabs. And here I am sitting with him. You know why? Because I felt, as a Palestinian, that not only Mordechai, but thousands and thousands of Israelis have come to realize and to discover the fact that they are in the Middle East, they are in the middle of Arabs and Palestinians, and that if they want security and peace, they will have to come understanding with that flood of people there, one way or another. That's why the forces of peace in Israel are growing. We here, we should encourage them grow more. And we Palestinians should encourage them grow more.
When we see Israelis with blue eyes, blonde hair, and M16 rifles in our land, peace, he asks? I can't accept that. Milham asks him where he's from. He tells Milham he's never seen a speck of his homeland, Palestine, but he's ready to die for Palestine. Milham replies, you have to understand. Wait a minute, I'm talking about reality. When we have our state, no one will argue with us. Not even the Americans. Not the Arabs. Not the Russians.
The fact that violence began by the Palestinian side, no doubt about it. Violence, bloodshed.
Do you call it violence or defense?
All right, you call it defense, I call it violence. That's a matter of words.
I want to ask you, originally, where do you come from?
From Tel Aviv. I was born in
No, your father.
That's what you ask me where I come from.
No, where your father comes from.
You make it a second question.
Yeah, no, the last question I asked, where your father come from?
My father comes from Poland and my mother comes from Germany.
That means will never be peace in Palestine until when you live in Poland. Because the time you born in Palestine and I born in a camp, that's nonsense. My generation in Palestine and you live in my fatherland, my generation land, and you tell me about peace, where you come from the peace? From which side, from which corner?
I think we will have to decide.
You can persuade me from this.
I understand what you're saying, but I want to tell you that what you are saying means that we have to decide who is right with the force of guns. You want to do it? You want to have war?
Guns, blood, I don't care. As far
okay, let's continue the fight.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think.
I'm ready.
I'm ready. It's not
I'm
me.
ready to fight.
I'm ready to fight. It's not me. It's my sixth generation forward.
Okay, whatever you say, I only answer you.
Okay.
My answer is that this means you want another
live
war.
Over my land and you're talking about peace. It's not make sense. Never be sense.
Mordechai Bar-On was born in Palestine 20 years before the State of Israel existed. His parents had come to these shores in 1924 with the early Zionist immigrants and settled in the citrus orchard region near Tel Aviv. For a time, the Jewish immigrants lived in relative peace with the Arabs. But when he was 18, Bar-On and the Jews of Palestine were facing their first war. His army superiors quickly recognized his abilities, and he was handpicked as senior aide to General Moshe Dayan in 1956. At the age of 35, he was promoted to full colonel, and then named Chief Education Officer, a key job he held until his retirement in 1968. He went to work with the Zionist youth movement, and he taught history at Hebrew University in the 70s. After Israel's spectacular victory in the Six-Day War, He saw an opportunity for peace. There will be no solution without the Palestinians, he tells a group at a kibbutz. The future of the West Bank is hotly debated in Israel. Half the population wants to keep it. The other half would trade some or most of the land for peace. Bar-On, as part of the Peace Now movement, would go further than most Israelis to make a deal for peace. And privately, Bar-On is one of the few willing to consider an independent Palestinian state. In Jerusalem, a Friday evening Sabbath dinner. The Bar-On family is traditional, but not typical. His two eldest daughters are married and live nearby. One son-in-law is a Palestinian. The Bar-Ons consider themselves ardent Zionists, committed to building the Jewish state.
I'm not a disloyal Israeli. I'm a very loyal Israeli who for years was doing his job in defending his cause by talking to audiences in America, among others, to show them how right we were and how wrong the other side was. And here, for once, you have to talk in a manner in which right and wrong become irrelevant. And what is relevant is how can we make ourselves live with each other beyond right and wrong. And this is a transformation in the mind of people. I have in my tongue a wealth of arguments against the Palestinians. And occasionally, even in this trip, I use them. But more and more I felt it's wrong to do that. I mean, that's not the thing you ought to do now. What you ought to do now is not to convince yourself or the audience that you were wrong and right and they were wrong. The hell with that. Or you have to find a modus in which the other side will be able to live with and be with you in your great attempt to make peace.
I'm Rabbi Sanford Reagans, and together with my colleague, Rabbi Leonard Bierman, I welcome you here to Leo Beck Temple this evening.
The fifth day of their tour in the United States.
Deeply concerned with the life of our community.
Bar-On and Milham appeared in a Reform synagogue in the Bel Air section of Beverly Hills.
Discussion of the issues of the hour.
Please, warm welcome to Mohammed Milham.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
A handful of hecklers from the militant Jewish Defense League denounced Bar-On as a traitor and protested Milham's presence as a desecration of the synagogue.
If you would like to take your questions or statements and put them on paper, they will be read. However, if you continue these outbursts, you will be escorted out of here. Understand?
This is not the first time
It won't be the last time either.
This is not the first time I visit a synagogue and address a Jewish audience. Several times I had the privilege to address Jewish audience, both in the occupied territories and
here to listen to you. Would you be quiet? Well, shut up.
Well, whether it is liberated or occupied, it is some land somewhere. But I want to be honest with you all and tell you, you can shout and make me unable to speak, but this solves no problem. This solves no problem. Other Palestinians may shout and not let Mordechai speak, and also it solves no problem. Back there in the Middle East, there are people, there are human beings. You have 150 million Arabs. Some of them are Christians, some of them are Muslims, and this is a reality. In Israel, there are about 3.5 million Israelis. They are Jews, and this is also a reality. If you want to help your people, if you want to help the state you believe in, you should listen to me. You cannot escape from me. I cannot escape from you. We'll have to listen to each other.
Milham was expelled by Israeli military authorities from the town where he was mayor in May of 1980. He was deported along with the mayor and a religious leader of the neighboring town a few hours after 5 Israeli settlers had been killed there. 10 days after his expulsion, Milham brought his case to the United Nations.
Our problem is a problem.
3 times in the next 6 months, the Security Council unanimously passed resolutions calling upon Israel to let him go back home. The United States abstained in the voting, but openly criticized Israel for its actions. Israel claimed Milham and the others had incited the violence. Most of the Israeli press editorialized against the government, saying there was no connection between the mayors and the killings. Within weeks, the killer was caught and convicted. In December, the Israeli government ignored a recommendation from the Israeli Supreme Court to allow the mayors to return home. In the months following, Milham made several angry speeches, including a call for action against what he called Zionist Nazism.
That to be expelled, one, to lose their right to going back home, anybody, anywhere in the world, would feel deep hatred and hostility towards those who expelled him, those who have denied him the right of being home and so on.
Since his expulsion, he has lived in Amman, capital of Jordan, in a rented apartment. From here, his hometown is just over an hour's drive to the west. Originally a Roman town, Al-Hul is 10 miles south of Bethlehem in the West Bank. Arab farms cover the hills of this land, but since the 1967 war, more and more has been claimed by Israel for Jewish settlements. 4 years after his expulsion, the 25,000 people of Al-Hul still consider Milham their mayor. His house and vineyard are just off the main road. His 95-year-old father lives next door. Milham's grandchildren live here. His son-in-law, a doctor, tends Milham's vines in his spare time.
There's only one thing I aspire to, I long for, which is to go back home and sit there and work honestly in my vineyard. This is what the Palestinians want. This is what the good Israelis want. This is what anybody of you in San Francisco wants, you see, want to live in peace. Our people
They spoke before the Commonwealth Club of California, a public affairs forum whose membership is by invitation.
But in no case should you remember that
it includes retired foreign service officers, scholars, journalists, and writers.
There are bad Palestinians, true, but the majority are good Palestinians. They want peace. They think of peace. The ghost of war hangs over every house, you see, wherever. Go to Israel also. Their sons are being killed day and night, you see. I received a letter from a soldier fighting in Lebanon. His name was Goodman. And he told me he came upon a Palestinian killed, 13 years old. He had a machine gun in the right hand and a mathematics book in the left hand. And he told me that he started crying. He started crying. And next day he received a bullet in his leg and it was paralyzed. I visited him. I wished him good recovery. He was a soldier fighting against the Palestinians. But at last he realized the fact that this is unholy war to kill Palestinians who learn mathematics and fight for freedom. Thank you.
Mr. Milham, you were expelled from Israel for inciting to violence. You called for jihad, holy war against the Jews, in his speech in Hebron, and soon thereafter several Jews were slaughtered on their way back from Sabbath services. I'm making a statement. Are you now willing to apologize for calling for jihad, holy war against the Jews, and are you now willing to tell the PLO to make peace with Israel and to stop terrorism and making war on Israel?
Is that a question or a lecture?
You were expelled for calling for a holy war against the state of Israel. Are you willing to remove that threat of holy war against Israel?
Are you finished now?
I will continue with the rest.
Please quietly sit down. First of all, I was not expelled from Israel. I was expelled from my town, from my hometown. That's number one. I was expelled from the town where I was born by people who have no right to expel me or who have no right to be there. Second, I have not called for jihad. I have not called for jihad.
1980. Jihad.
Why don't you throw that guy out? Right. He claims to be a reporter.
Look, very honestly, if any one of you, and if the gentleman was in my place, the mayor of Halhul, he would try by all means to get rid of that occupation. And supposing that I call from Halhul or Hebron for jihad, and you know jihad is a holy war, I would be calling people who are helpless, who have no weapons, who have no arms, who can do nothing. If you are an Israeli, I'm pointing at the gentleman who asked me the question, and if you like the state of Israel, and if you like to maintain the security of Israel, you see, listen to me, listen to Mordechai. We are in the age where we should think and try to analyze and say, where is the wrong and how can we tackle it very quietly, you see. There are heart attacks nowadays. Be careful about it.
If I may just add one sentence. If I may paraphrase on the words used by Orwell, in the Middle East, there are two types of speeches, of words. There is a war speak and there is a peace speak. And when you listen carefully, you know who is speaking for what. Thank you.
Fine Arts Radio for Chicago, WFMT at 98.7 FM, broadcasting from studios in Illinois Center.
Studs Terkel has hosted a popular radio show in Chicago for 22 years. By now, Milham and Baron had done more than 24 radio and television interviews. The two men had never met before the tour. They were born 30 miles apart, and they had shared a history. But each man brought his own reading of history, and each of them would find his own way of using it.
Two brief fragments from two songs, each one familiar to each of my guests. One, an Israeli song, and one, a song familiar to Palestinians. I was thinking, what comes to your mind?
The Palestinian song is in a way more familiar to me than the Israeli song. Until 1948, we had a very intimate contact with Palestinians. We used to go to their villages, drink coffee, visit homes, meet them in the marketplace. And this song is a very known song among the Palestinians. And I heard it hundreds of times from Arabs in my own native village.
Mayor Milham.
Second song in Arabic reminds me of my expulsion, you see. He says in the second verse that our lovers have gone without saying goodbye, see? And that is really, I remember when I was expelled on the second day of May, 1980, I didn't say goodbye because they told my wife that I would be back in half an hour. But anyway, the song seems to touch the very sensitive feelings of the Palestinians. That is, in 1948 and 1967, when people were forced out and families were divided, until now, there have been people trying to find the members of their family, you see. So this song seems to touch the feelings of every Palestinian in the diaspora, in the refugee camps, in the diaspora, even the Arabs who have chosen to migrate to the United States. It's more passionate.
You know, when Mayor Milham mentions diaspora, refugee camps, parents unable to say goodbye to their children, does that ring a bell with you?
Yes. Much of my own consciousness as a Jew relates to wanderings, to persecution, to families disrupted. I have uncles who died in the Holocaust. I have uncle who perished in Europe. I didn't know them. Here you've got a person who himself was expelled, and we have to carry this in mind. We Jews have to carry this in mind, that our own collective memories should not blind us to know that not only doesn't it give us any permission to persecute others, but that the thing that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago happened already 40 years ago and is over. By now, the problem that is fronting us is not our sufferings of the past, but rather their suffering of the present.
Even on travel days, they averaged 5 appearances a day, often starting before breakfast and speaking until long after dinner.
Mr. Baron, from Israel's point of view, who do you think you should be talking to?
There's no question that the PLO at this moment is the
This
most...
is the first time that an Israeli and a Palestinian have
And they tell me, recognize the state of Israel. I should recognize Begin's government which expelled me.
And I do agree that Israelis tend to exaggerate the sense of fear and weakness.
In a couple of weeks that you've been touring, do you believe that the Palestinians and the Israelis are going to be able to live in peace in the future as two peoples?
There is no problem between the Palestinian people and the Israeli people as people. The difference mainly arises from the policymakers.
So maybe if you could put your arms around each other, that would be terrific. You feel comfortable doing your arms around each other? That's
Oh, look at the smile.
We're here representing the majority of the Jewish organizations in Cleveland, and we want people to know that the people in there are radicals or fanatics, and they do not represent the mainstream of Jewish thought.
We have to remember that the PLO was founded back in 1964. And it was explicitly and loudly and clearly was formed in order to destroy Israel.
What about this PLO? You people here think it is a terrorist organization. They want to throw Israel into the sea. They are killers. They are murderers. This is not true.
So why don't you help us out?
Lox, eggs, and onions?
I recommend matzo ball and noodle together.
All right, I'll take
For me, the Navy being...
Milham had visited the U.S. a dozen times since his expulsion. Baron had made the trip 40 times. Until recently, each had spoken to partisan groups for his own side.
Onion roll.
Baron on behalf of the United Jewish Appeal, and Milham to dramatize the plight of the Palestinians. This time, the audiences were different. At a Chicago lunch, there were Christian clergy, a half a dozen rabbis, journalists, educators, and Arab-American businessmen.
And I'd like to ask Mr. Baron, former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin has recently said, "We will never recognize or negotiate with the PLO." Is this official Labor Party policy? And if so, how will you in the peace camp try to change this policy? Or will you try to change this policy?
It is the policy of the Labour Party, except for the word never. We have, even in our camp, some difficulty with the PLO because in spite of the signals that we have heard, the signals have not been straight and clear, not by Mr. Milham, who said it very clearly here and before, but for the PLO. And our problem is not only to be convinced that there are signals, but to convince other Israelis that what happened is a basic transformation in the whole meaning of PLO.
I'm trying to figure out, is it really the military that's creating the problems in the West Bank, or is it the settlements? What is the role of Americans to see that some of that stops so that there isn't the continued encroachment?
If you can help the peace process there, please do it. If you don't know, please keep silent. If you don't know what the issue is, what the case of Israel or the Palestinians is, if you are not well informed, please don't do anything. It's very harmful. Once you are well informed, you can tell your congressmen and your candidates for the presidency, please speak about employment, about inflation, about corruption, about pollution. Forget about the Middle East.
If I could believe that we can do away with the involvement of the great powers in the Middle East, I would endorse what Mr. Milham said. If I can pray to God, let us solve our problems amongst ourselves and let the big powers shy away and stop be meddling in the Middle East. But that's not the case. I mean, we know that the Russians are trying to meddle very harder, and I think that the Americans have interest and have served different purposes. I don't think we can hope for that.
What would be his assessment, Milham, the proportion of Palestinians who are not just ready to reconcile, but actually would be willing to speak for peace now, like we heard some things here?
I want to be frank with you. I am at close relations with Chairman Arafat and the PLO. They are my sole legitimate representative. Chairman Arafat is supported by the majority of the Palestinians inside and outside. And he is not a dreamer. No, he is realistic. And he is ready, and the Palestinians are ready for half the loaf, as they say it, side by side with Israel. Am I clear on that? Two-state solution. Now, these people, beginning from Chairman Arafat, they have sent signals on many occasions. Not signals, personal signals, no, but in the institutions of the PLO. And I remember I was surprised at one time when there was a meeting of PNC members in Amman, Jordan. Chairman Arafat was there, and one who I consider to be a very extremist. He told Chairman Arafat, Mr. Chairman, if you want to accept the Reagan plan, negotiate with Israel, you want to make sure that we Palestinians are hungry. Can we get half the loaf? If we can get half the loaf, Mr. Chairman, go ahead. When I heard it, I said, is it true that this extremist should say this?
My feeling, and maybe I have my sensitivities, my feeling was that the overall balance of the way you present things is not quite clear what your aim is. Are you at cross purposes with me? Are you trying to project a parallel and different projection in order to win the public for your agenda, your Palestinian agenda? When you say that Arafat is all rosy and beautiful, well, I'm not with you. I say that the Israeli government is an obstacle to peace, but you should know that I also think that the PLO did not yet overcome the legacy of them being a great obstacle for peace. So we can do this debate, okay, but then we'll not come with a joint purpose. We'll go on a tangent. And you have to understand it. At many moments, I don't feel well that I'm with you here. I feel uneasy with it. And that whatever value you give to it, I may have to summarize the experience not completely as a positive. I may regret that I've done it. I'm not quite happy with the balance.
There is much more for the Palestinian to complain than there is for an Israeli, much more. What you care for, what you are suspicious about, the future intentions of the Arabs, of the Palestinians, about the security of the state, about how the state should, what's the borders, what about Jerusalem. You speak about the future of Jerusalem when you have sovereignty over all Jerusalem. You speak about security when you have the most powerful army. When I speak of security, I speak from the point completely different. See? So, if I want to lay the Palestinian position as it is and try to draw sympathy and support, it's not to have people prejudiced against Israel, to take sides with the Palestinians, you see? If you were in my place, you would be doing the same things.
There is no way on earth that the Palestinians will ever give up their struggle. You can make a case against it. It doesn't help you. They feel that way. And there's no chance on earth that they will give this up. We cannot suppress a national movement. There's no way that we can do it, especially if this national movement is surrounded by so many other states and nations that are sympathizing with them. So when you keep this occupation, you actually imply a continuous war.
In Cleveland, Baron spoke alone. Afterwards, he was accused of threatening U.S. support for Israel.
What do you want of us? Why are you here?
First of all, I think that you deserve a fair notion of what Israel is, and you don't get it. There is a strong tendency among organized Jewish people to suppress the ability of American Jews to know that in Israel what I'm saying will have the sympathy of 50% of the people. I'm not a marginal person in Israel. I mean, don't you deserve to hear the voice of half of the nation who may be tomorrow in government?
I think the thing that becomes controversial is the manner in which we so frequently hear that. When a group takes out a full-page ad in the New York Times opposing a policy of the Israeli government, they're not attempting to influence the Israeli government. They're attempting to influence the American government to lean on Israel. Look, I've been a part of the Jewish lobby the Israeli lobby here for a long time. And I'm not as confident as you are about our power. We lose a lot of fights.
We lose fights, we win a lot. And we win the fact that the United States support Israel to the amount of $2 billion a year.
Yes, we have many, many friends. My concern is that we give ammunition to those people who don't wish Israel well, the enemies of Israel, and give them the opportunity to say, we're not anti-Israel, we're not anti-Semitic. Look what these people are saying. That's all we're doing.
I think the only way
In 2 weeks on the road, they had proven that dialogue was possible despite their serious disagreements.
And we have to scream and yell at each other.
But after almost every speech, one or both of them was angry. And every day, one or the other talked privately about quitting the tour.
They put in jail because they want security. They demolish houses because they want security. This is not true. They demolish, they expel, they expropriate because they want land without people. That is all. They want land without people. Land is more important than peace. And as long as land is more important than peace, then it's going to be bad for everyone.
The problem is that each side feels not only completely just, but also feels that he has got all the grievances against the other side, and feels so honestly.
They have thrown 2,000 Palestinians like me, mayors and intellectuals. They have thrown out hundreds of thousands like me outside. You never knew their names. They are poor people, workers, laborers. You never heard about their names. All right. They threw us out. Where do we go?
The question is not that I'm responsible for the Palestinians. There are moral problems involved, but primarily there are existential problems. I consider the occupation to be the most detrimental thing for me as a Jew, as a Zionist. So I consider this to be a Jewish problem, although we call it often a Palestinian problem.
The more they harass us, the more we regroup. Don't humiliate people. Tell them it's enough.
As a background to my great eagerness to come out to the United States with Mr. Milham and do this tour with him, I was under tremendous pressures. Why do we do that? It's going to be negative. Like the prophet has said, it was like fire burning in me. My wife said, are you sure you are doing the right thing? Aren't you afraid you may lose your stature, your fame, your prestige in Jewish circles in Israel? No single person can make the contribution that can lead him to say, I did it. I'm not going to change the world. But it is incumbent upon me to at least do what I can do. I can speak. And I can speak with a Palestinian friend and show the Israelis and show the Americans and show the American Jews that the dialogue is possible with all these differences that we find amongst ourselves, but that we are united with one burning desire to stop soon the occupation. Thank you.
I frequently do programs both with Palestinians and Israelis. I've not had the opportunity to do both together so frequently. People will not sit around the same table. The opportunity for this interaction is unique, and I think that you must have been perhaps surprised at the reception you've received in the United States.
In both cases, yes. Favorably.
But we would not have been together if we don't belong to the same camp, the camp of peace and justice.
Yes.
Would not be together. When we say the United
Even when
Nations
speaking to their American audiences, they were talking to each other, searching for common ground, seeing the conflict from the other side, but also uncovering their differences.
Israel doesn't exist. The United Nations gave Israel...
Baron said later, I listened to Mr. Milham with great pain.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been racist, discriminatory practices by the government of Israel and by the extremist settlers.
In the West Bank,
lots of racism. There is lots of suppression.
You cannot expect me to accept what you are saying now. I mean, I think that the Palestinians have been as racist as what you think we are. The term racism doesn't apply to the situation. We are struggling between two nations. Forget about race. Israel is not a race. You look at the Israelis, you'll find falashas with black curled hair. You'll find Israelis with blonde eyes and blue eyes. I mean, the term race is a vicious term. I mean, it's just calling name each other. You are racist by saying that I am racist. But this doesn't lead us to any place. I mean, if you say suppression...
But we were talking about something very specific. We had been talking, excuse me, about the role that the UN has had historically.
No, about this government. Neither our government is racist. This is not a correct approach.
No, the Likud government, Begin's government, is a fascist, racist.
No, you are not right. It's neither fascist nor racist. It is suppressive of your nation. This is a national conflict between two nations in which we won. And that's why we are now suppressing you. If you would have won, you would have suppressed us. What we have to look for is a way in which these two nations will have equality of rights and therefore would be able to live next to each other, on which basis we stand. But by calling name each other, you only deter us from believing that you have honest intention.
I was not shocked at some of what I heard from Mordechai, because I knew it all the time. The one who would have been shocked would have known for the first time what these Israelis and their mentality, their attitude is. So I was not one of those.
I think that he grew to believe me, and it took time for him. But he grew to believe my honesty. I think he did. And via this, through that fact, I think that he also grew to believe more than he ever believed before, that there is a chance that there are enough Israelis and that the kind of Israelis that may end up reaching a real hand towards him.
That was back in 1980.
We are experimenting in our very itinerary, in this tour of us. We experience it right here, this evening, yesterday, the day before yesterday, in speeches, around the breakfast table, going in a car, sizing each other, watching each other, listening to each other, suspecting each other, and struggling internally to get rid of all those images that we imbibed in the last 55 years of erasing pictures, of trying to build up new ones. I was very impressed when I read an article that the famous British historian E.H. Carr published in the London Times at the beginning of 1942, in the middle of the worst blitz of the Germans over London, in praise of the German culture. And in his introduction he said, one day we'll have to make peace. You never make peace with friends, you make peace with enemies. And you have within the war to preserve your ability to view your enemy as a human being. Because you will have to get to the point in which you'll have to reach your hand to him and revive the ability to live with him.
Yes, operator, I'd like to call the city of Ramallah, which is on the West Bank, and we go through Jerusalem, and I can give you the codes and the house
Detroit, April 3rd. Mohammed Milham's father had suffered a heart attack. Milham was called back home. Tour director Gail Pressburg began the search for a Palestinian replacement. For Milham, the tour was suddenly over, with only half the itinerary completed.
He's in the hospital?
He should be in the hospital. I think he had once trouble with his pacemaker and they changed it.
We have to figure out where to go from here. Do you have some thoughts about Palestinians?
With half an hour before his flight, there was only time for breakfast and farewell. Baron would have to speak alone in the next few cities. Under other circumstances, it would have been a time to summarize and reflect.
How can I forget you? Yeah, okay.
Good luck. But for now, they would have to reach their conclusions separately.
Give them my best again.
In 1956,
The tour continued. Baron was joined by a Palestinian history professor. But he was about to be challenged in another, more demanding forum back in Israel. On the evening of April 22nd, Baron arrived home. An unexpected national election had been set for late July. The ruling Likud government was in trouble. Mordechai Baron and the Israeli peace movement had been waiting 7 years for this moment. He had never been a candidate for public office, and when he was asked to run, he did not immediately accept. But friends persuaded him. By early June, he was an active candidate for a seat in Israel's parliament. Politics is a dirty business, a soldier tells him. But somebody has to do it. Baron's party, the Citizens' Rights Movement, had opposed Israel's invasion of Lebanon. Baron tells the soldiers, Lebanon was a war we chose. We didn't have to do it. A corporal says, it's all right. American aid will solve all our problems. But Baron warns, they've already given us so much. The day may come when they'll stop. That's the fear. Every year, $2 billion. Don't tell me, the soldier says. Tell the people who support Begin and Sharon. Traveling through villages in northern Israel, Baron campaigns among Israeli Arabs. There are 700,000 of them with citizenship and voting rights. Here, the issue is not the West Bank, but local concerns: roads, schools, taxes, and inflation. But it's among the successful and educated Israelis of European descent, the grassroots of the Labor Party, that Baron spends much of his time. Unlike the Likud, Labor has been willing to consider a deal to return the West Bank to Jordan. Baron argues that any deal has to include the Palestinians. From the Jordanian capital, Israel's election campaign was being closely watched. Ever since his expulsion, Mohammed Milham had known that only a labor government would consider letting him go home to the West Bank. Labor had begun the campaign with a comfortable lead in the polls, and although the gap was narrowing, there seemed a real prospect of a more moderate government in Israel. Since his expulsion, Milham had become deeply involved in PLO activities. He considered himself a moderate, but the radicals in the organization rejected talk of peace with Israel, especially after the war in Lebanon. For Milham, a labor victory might strengthen the moderates within the PLO and buy time. On the evening of July 23rd, in the Tel Aviv headquarters of his party, Mordechai Baron and his wife Arella waited for election returns. Political observers around the world were describing it as the most important national decision in Israel's history. By 10 o'clock, Baron's election was assured. But the final tabulation revealed a stalemate. A month of bargaining would be required to forge even a weak governing coalition. Israel had refused to make a decision. 2 days after the election, in Amman, Milham's family is together for the summer. Tomorrow, his wife will leave for Halhul to visit the rest of the family.
When all these hopes collapse, a peaceful compromise solution for peace, for stability, but still it seems there's no hope. Those people who have chosen to live on our land and our homes, it seems that there's no hope there. We should find other means and methods, you see. That was mine, and that was Mayor Frage's, that was all the others in their frustration, you see. Now, this will give a leeway to the extremists to say, haven't we told you all the time? Haven't we been telling you all the time? See? So I think everybody, there will be now a prolonged stalemate, you see, in the politics of the Middle East.
I do believe that nations, on the whole, behave rationally. Of course, we have many examples in history in which people destroy themselves. But I certainly believe in the intelligence of the Palestinians, and I know that the Jews are clever people. Without being chauvinistic, there are people who have been trained by history. And if these two nations are rational, in the last account, any continuation of the struggle for too long, I mean, we can continue for a year or two, but if we do not reach peace soon enough, it spells the destruction of both sides.
The efforts of this Israeli and this Palestinian wrestling with the chances for peace reflect in a way larger shifts on this issue in this country and in Israel. Ever since Israel's costly, inconclusive invasion of Lebanon 2 years ago, dissent has grown within Israel over government policies concerning the West Bank and Palestinians. And in this country, within the American Jewish community, there are more voices now questioning the military and political direction of Israel. There are those who say the United States should play a more active role in the fate of the West Bank. Israel is our #1 foreign aid recipient, expected to ask for a dramatic increase in military and economic aid, $4 billion for next year, which would not have to be repaid. But how far can outside intervention go? In the end, it must depend on a minimum of trust between the two peoples most concerned, Arabs and Israelis. Next week on Frontline, one of the most controversial issues of our time, to treat or not to treat the severely handicapped infants known as baby does.
It's the story of agonizing decisions faced by parents and doctors. How far to go with medical treatment for deformed and brain-damaged infants.
I went up to see him, and there was more equipment and tubes on him than baby. We're worried about whether we've done him a disservice.
People once born have a right to live, to be protected by the medical profession and by society.
Baby does growing up. What kind of future can they expect? Should every possible means be used to keep them alive?
I can remember saying to the doctors, what does the world need another retarded child for? What are you doing?
It's true that there are a lot of gray areas where you can't answer this question.
There comes a time when you just can't say, because we don't like what we have, we're going to get rid of it.
If, by some miracle, we had maintained her on a machine, say indefinitely, she would have no hope of ever being on anything but that machine. She would have no sense of anybody, of anything other than just existence. And to me, there's a quality of life that should be investigated or should be understood.
I don't see any qualities that a person must have in order to be sustained. The fact that they're alive, they've got a right to that.
Some people think because the technology exists, even the most tenuous potential for life has to be prolonged mechanically. It's using the most highly sophisticated equipment to walk into the darkest of forests. And for all the fancy stuff, what you haven't got is a flashlight.
You try to look at, from this child's perspective, would this child be better off, dead or alive?
That's our program next week. I'm Judy Woodruff. Good night.
For a transcript of this program, please send $4 to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for Frontline was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. For videocassette information about Frontline, write to PBS Video, Box 8092, Washington, D.C., 20024.